Well, good morning. I'm Ken Bibrai, an executive managing director at Savills, a global commercial real estate firm, and the host of Coffee with Ken, a thought leadership series at the nexus of business and politics. Our last conversation was with Charlotte Gassett, the managing director of the Hispanic Federation in Puerto Rico. And today we welcome my buddy, thought leader, quasi-historian, real estate broker galore, and the founder of the American Real Estate Association, Jason Haber. Good to see you, Jason.
Good to see you. I got my coffee ready.
You got a temperature too, huh? So you kind of accuse this
I
of being
woke up with
COVID with Ken.
102.
That's not funny. It's not, this is
First thought was, I'm so glad we decided not to do this live with an audience in person, like we first talked about, because I wouldn't have made it. I would have stepped out for that. But no one's around me. So if I cough a little bit or sneeze, yeah, I apologize. But you know.
Well, nothing will stop you. I know that for sure. So look, before we dive into kind of so many topics, I mean, it's funny just getting inbound from friends who are residential brokers, consumers, advocates, kind of curious. I'm here in DC, you're Florida, you're New York, you're all over the place. But give folks a little kind of context, like how long you've been in residential real estate, like your quick background and kind of like what your day job, because now you've taken on all these roles, but like let's level set and kind of like what you've been up to.
So I've been in residential real estate for 17 years now. Based in New York for 16 of those 17. And then in the last year and a half or so, I've expanded my business to South Florida as well. And so I'm very active in the co-op condo townhouse market. I've done some multifamily sales as well. And so I think I have a pretty broad experience on the broker side and then also on the investor side. We've had a team over the years that acquired multifamily assets. And so that gave me exposure to the ownership and operation side as well of the business. And listen, I was very content with my business and, bouncing back and forth between the Upper West Side and Boca Raton. And then everything changed in September. And it was honestly, and I know people won't believe, there was no grand plan. It was a weekend whim that started this whole thing.
Well, let's dive into it, right? Because I think it's important for folks to know, like, we really got to know each other cutting our teeth on Upper West Side politics, right? Like not commercial real estate, residential, right? So like I've always kind of associated you, despite you being on, taxi TV in New York City and selling the most expensive units in Midtown Manhattan, but also kind of being like in the weeds on like political advocacy, grassroots, right? Like talk a little bit about like your political experience and then when the National Association of Realtors really kind of started catching your attention. Was it last fall or was it like beforehand? Like when did you start kind of recognizing this? Because I think it ties in. This is advocacy. There's an association. It represents realtors, right? Like,
right.
Politics is tied into all of that.
Yeah, no, in fact, you could say my career has now come full circle because I spent so much time in government and politics, whether it was working for our friend Scott Stringer or for other electeds. I had various roles in the sort of state Democratic Party and the county party in New York. So I did that for years before I was in real estate, but I also did it like while I was in real estate too. So I was still active as an agent in Democratic politics in New York. And that didn't change. What changed for me was that I wasn't an advocate and I wasn't involved in policy within the real estate industry.
Yeah.
And it never occurred to me. I so new to NAR that I just joined them a little under a year ago. So I was one of the most junior members. In fact, in the first few weeks when I launched my campaigns, I was calling them the NRA because like I couldn't get the acronym right. It was like, no, NAR. Like I knew nothing at the time. That's how green I was. Because in New York, and this is one of those quirks that your audience may or may not know, we're actually not members of NAR. Mm-hmm. So I had no touch points with them. Didn't go to any events, wasn't involved in the 1,400 person board they have. I had no connectivity to them outside of I joined about 11 months ago because I got licensed in South Florida. And so I was new to even being a member there. In New York, we're members of REBNY instead.
Sure. Yeah. Fascinating. So then when did you become a member, you sort of start uncovering some stuff and it becomes a little bit more public, right? Like it sounds like it coincided with your kind of involvement as well as just like things happening with lawsuits and their own kind of,
Well, there
issues. Take us back to last fall. Like what kind
were
of, how did this all
two
come?
separate issues,
Yeah.
and while they are inextricably, they're separate, right?
Yeah.
The lawsuits are different from the sexual harassment issues, but I do think that they're inextricably linked because I think they speak to some institutional cultural problems within the organization. In late August, Deborah Kamen of the New York Times did a report uncovering rampant sexual harassment and the toxic work culture in NAR. And I read the article and I was like, wow, I was like, they're going to clean house and whatever. They'll all be gone later today. This is on a Saturday morning. And like 2 or 3 hours later, it was weird because no real estate boards had put out any statements. No firms put out any statements. Everyone was silent. And I was like, this is really weird. I was like, why is no one talking about this article? It just seemed wrong to me. On a whim, the next day, after 24 hours went by and still it was silent, I did a change.org petition calling for the then president of NAR to step aside. And it gained momentum and traction. And he left. He resigned, I think, the next day or 2 days later. When the New York Times did their follow-up story, they mentioned that I launched this petition.
Yeah.
And that was the moment, because that's when people started calling me. And what I mean is specifically women around the country started to call and message and share their own stories. And I was like, wow, I was like, they got a lot of problems, much deeper than the article even touched upon. I mean, I spoke to people all over the country. So we put together a working group and we said, because I didn't know, I was like, what does NAR need to do to change? So we put together a 4-point plan. We put it online as the form of a petition, and that became the foundation for the NAR Accountability Project, which was just an advocacy group. And we put out these 4 points. Everyone said we were crazy. We launched the Day of Action in Chicago. We did this press conference protest outside their main office, and change started to happen. In the end, 3 of our 4 points were adopted, more or less, by NAR. So we're making all this progress. I'm talking to agents all over the country. And then the lawsuit verdict comes out. And while, again, now it's separate, the idea was, wait, something's really wrong within this organization.
Yeah.
Because they had messaged, we're going to win. We got this. No problem. There was no break glass plan. It was just, we're going to win. And instead, the jury turned back a verdict in under 2.5 hours, which completely changed the industry. And so at that point,
and then led to a settlement, right? Like, so they even
that came later. Well,
yeah. So it just kind of like continues, huh? Like,
but the idea was, so then late fall, I've successfully built this advocacy organization. We have everyone in the industry is frustrated and upset and feels like we've lost the way. You got to remember, it's hard for people to understand how big NAR is. How, they're the biggest trade association in America. People don't realize that.
Yeah. It's like over 1 million members, right? Like $1 billion
over 1.5 million members. But it's also one of the few organizations that require members. Like when you join your local MLS, you are in almost all cases, not all, almost all cases required to join. And so they have this lock on the industry. About 17% of all doctors are members of the American Medical Association. 15% of all lawyers are members of the American Bar Association. But 99% of agents outside of New York are realtors. They own the word realtor. So they're very powerful. And maybe it was just naivete on my part, because I didn't know that. I didn't even know. I kept calling them the NRA. So what do I know? And I knew nothing. But it occurred to me that even though they've been around since, I think, 1908, maybe there was an opening that didn't exist before.
Sure.
And just because an organization's been around since 1908 doesn't mean they'll be here in 2025 and 2026. The world changes. This was a moment where everything was going to be different. And I think, and we sort of tapped into it. So I was like, well, maybe we can start a new trade association. Like if I said to you a year ago, hey, Ken, I want to start a new trade association, You would say I'm crazy and I'm wasting my time. And now today, when I say that, you just say I'm crazy,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm not wasting my time.
In most early, neither.
Yeah. And so that was when we started having these conversations with Mauricio Umansky in the
Yeah.
fall about us joining forces and doing something. I'll tell you something. The original plan, though, was to spend 6 months behind the scenes doing all the paperwork and administrative and launching this in, I don't know, May, June.
Hmm.
But in our meetings, we both had a sense, and we didn't have like insider information or anything like that, but we both had a sense that between January and June, there was going to be a black swan event that would fundamentally change our industry. And that came in the settlement. We didn't know that that was going to happen, but the settlement sparked a lot of anger and frustration in the industry because of the terms.
And do a couple seconds on like what the settlement was, right? Like there was a
Right.
lawsuit
So the
out of
lawsuit, right?
Missouri, right? Like you just level set real quick.
Commission lawsuit. NAR agreed their damages would have been, they were found guilty, and the damages would have been up to over $5 billion. They settled for 418 million. A lot of folks feel that it was a Faustian bargain, meaning they made a deal to save their own hide, but left a lot of the industry high and dry. And now we're dealing with all the ramifications of that settlement, which will kick in, unless it's not approved, will kick in on July 1st. And I actually believe it's going to be, the idea was that prices will come down and it'll be easier for buyers to buy homes. I actually think that won't happen. It'll be more expensive for buyers to buy homes. A lot of buyers will go it alone. They'll get their clock cleaned because they don't want to pay their own broker, and they'll get destroyed in negotiations and end up costing them more. And then there's this issue of, which I'm working on literally before we started this, and later today. It's something I'm working on every day, is to get Congress, both statutory and regulatory changes, so a buyer can finance the cost of their agent when they have to pay it. I feel like if you don't do that, you're going to disenfranchise people from the market. It's going to hurt the housing market, which hurts the economy. And I don't think Washington is fully aware of what's coming.
So let's do a little bit more in Washington, right? Like I'm in DC. There's all these associations. And to your point, like they're there and they've existed and they're never going to go away and no one ever challenges them, right? Even the Justice Department, I think, had been kind of pursuing NAR for a long time and never really kind of had any traction. And now
they still are. We'll see.
Yeah.
To be determined.
But the ripple effects of this suit related to whether, how commissions are done between buyers and sellers and their agents and representatives, specifically Veterans Affairs, the VA, when they give loans, specifically say that the buyer can't pay their own agent, right? Like so that in of itself is, I think, like one of these ripples of unintended consequences that people aren't really appreciating the magnitude of that. So you're going to disadvantage veterans from having representation to protect themselves in negotiations in pursuing a house, right? Like, what are some of these other unintended consequences that are kind of popping out? I mean, the VA one seems like an obvious one, right?
Right. And I mean, NAR has issued statements saying that should change. I mean, they agreed to the settlement terms. So, I mean, again, like they knew what the settlement terms were. But from my perspective, we're about to disenfranchise veterans, which is wrong.
Yeah.
And so the Veteran Loan Guarantee Program very specifically says you cannot finance the cost of your agent. The challenge is the way we underwrite in this country is based on the value of the asset, not additive costs for the purchase. And so we probably need some wholesale changes in how we underwrite loans in this country in order for a buyer to finance the purchase. Think about it this way: on a $400,000 purchase, if you're financing 80%, so that's about $80,000. If you have to pay for your own agents, another $12,000 out of pocket. That's 15% more. That's a lot more. If you could finance that, even at today's higher, over 7% interest rates, you're looking at about $64 a month in mortgage costs, which of course you can refinance when mortgage rates drop and basically take out the expense. But if you have to go out of pocket, then you have to make a choice. It's like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing, so I'm going to either go it alone. I'm going to watch a TikTok video and I'll make myself an expert and I'll handle it. Or two, you're going to say, okay, I'm going to pay my agent, but then I have to go for a smaller house because I can't afford it. So it's a lose-lose the way it's
So
currently structured.
I noticed a couple weeks ago, it's even caught the president's attention, right? So
Yeah.
talk a little bit about how this is being framed, right? Like I feel like that's an important,
Yeah.
right? Like the framing is almost like, well, commission should come down because it's better for buyers, it'll make it cheaper. That's not inherently accurate, right? Like
Yes. And again, and from my perspective, obviously being a Democrat, I felt it was even more important
sure.
that I take a position on behalf of the trade association and be critical of President Biden, which I was. And there was a video I created. It was widely circulated around because the president said in his speech in Nevada last month, he said he called on realtors to lower their commissions. First of all, that would be commission setting, which it would be acting as a cartel, which we can't do. So, we can't just universally raise or lower commissions. But the other thing that's interesting is the average, 62% of all agents are women. The average salary, it's not salary, the average income is $56,000 a year. It's $20,000 less than the median income in this country. So you're calling on a group of people who, on an average, earn $56,000 a year to earn less. I just don't think that's a good message in an election year in any year.
Yeah.
So, so I was critical of the president's comments, and I think it's important for our new trade association to be vocal and to call balls and strikes as we see them.
Interesting.
And
so
I think that was a miss.
So you have that kind of framing. The media is also kind of trying to catch up and write about this and document. Like, how is the media reaction and kind of potential misinformation played out in your eyes? Yeah.
So a lot of the headlines are dead wrong. There was a CNN article a few weeks ago that said that they found a buyer who was waiting until July. They pulled out of the market, and then they're going to buy in July when prices are lower because commissions will be lower. Okay, but just go with me on that in a second. That means that a buyer is waiting on a commission adjustment. So that's 1%, 2%, 3%. So they're 97, 98% of the way there, but they're going to wait till July to try to save 2 or 3%. Meanwhile, interest rates are going up right now. So it could be way more expensive. It just doesn't make any sense. Like, it was like a reporter who just didn't use a calculator. Like it doesn't make any sense for a buyer to leave the market. Buyers are not leaving the market now under the theory that they're going to save 2% or 3% in this summer. It's not happening.
Yeah.
So we're trying to counter that narrative. The New York Times did an excellent story last week about the Veterans Affairs issue, which now is finally getting attention. The Times wrote on it. No one was talking about it. No one realized what was happening. We've sent letters to Fannie, HUD, FHFA, the VA, and just because it's there's a lot of sort of federal agencies here that need to get involved in helping buyers. If for instances when buyers are going to be paying their own agent, it's going to happen. And if we disenfranchise buyers, we've made a huge statutory and regulatory mistake in this country because it's going to hurt the housing market, which hurts the overall U.S. economy.
So much of what I think you and I appreciate from politics is you could be totally right on an issue and it doesn't matter, but if the timing is right, that's what matters, right? Politics is all about timing. I think real estate's about timing a lot of the time as well. So in this moment, with NAR kind of on their heels, kind of not stepping up to the plate, president saying stuff, media saying stuff, consumers, I think, genuinely not understanding what's going on. I think agents not really understanding. How is this vacuum playing out? Like with brokerages, brokerage houses, with your organization, like, how is this going to play out over the next 2 months to kind of have people understanding? And like, is there still uncertainty with the settlement in the suit by July, right? Like, it seems like no one has real answers, right?
So some brokerages are being proactive and are educating their agents, which is really the smart way to do it. They're hosting workshops and teaching them how to speak to clients. The ones that aren't, I think they're going to be those agents will be in a lot of trouble. Listen, I think going forward, do this. Do this. If you go into guys and girls, go into Google and type in "my realtor was a." Just do that, and you'll see what's out there. What the perception is. Just look at the first few. I was just doing this yesterday, and just look at what comes up automatically. You see it?
Yeah. A meme, a scammer.
Yes. Nothing positive.
Yeah.
Right? So what's happened is there are so many agents, and there are so low standards that you have a lot of bad actors in there, because for a while it was very easy, crazy market, like in the COVID era years, and a lot of people got licensed, and it benefited, frankly, the biggest trade association in America, because all those people then paid dues. So we look at it, this is a little counterintuitive for a trade association. We want less agents and higher standards. Just very different.
Yeah.
We want to make it harder to get licensed, to keep your license, and we think the agent count needs to drop. In 1978, the average agent did about 12 deals a year before email, social media, fax machines, cell phones. Yeah. Today, with all the technology and efficiency we have, the average agent does under 8 deals a year. Why? Because there's so many more of them.
Yeah.
You think there's too many?
Interesting. So talk to us about what's going to happen with American Real Estate Association over the next year, 2 years. Are you going to be able to kind of tap into that kind of MLS? You need to be registered with an association type game. How are you adding agents? I saw you just had a big, brokerage firm in New York kind of join the ranks.
Yeah.
Right? Joined, right? Like, so fill me in on where you are today and where you're headed.
So we're meeting with lots of different firms. We were very excited that the 5th biggest firm in New York, New York, headed by Stephanie Birkin, joined us. And we think there'll be a lot more of that happening in the coming months. I think people are interested in being a part of something new, especially given all that's happened and transpired. So people are excited about joining us. Everything is very new, but there's a willingness to do something different now in terms of, so the MLSs are sort of separately owned. There are 800 MLSs in this country. It's a lot. It's a lot. Well, what's interesting is, like take New York, for example. I think a lot of the fractionalization, the regionalization of the MLSs in some ways works as a restraint of trade. You're licensed by your state, New York, Florida, but I can only sell in New York City. I'm not a member of the Long Island Board of Realtors. So even though I'm from Jericho, which I know very well, or the Hamptons, which I know very well, I can't sell there because I'm not a member of the local board. I know people who are members of 6 MLSs, and they pay 6 times fees just to get access to the local data. I think this is a dated model. I think if you're licensed in a state, you should be able to see all the data in your state, hard stop. And so we're hoping to bring some innovations over the next year. We're working on lots of different things that I think will sort of advance forward the industry. I think there's been a disincentive to innovate in the MLSs because they're so different and they don't talk to each, except for some, they don't talk to each other by and large. And so if you're talking about creating third-party products with APIs, well, you've got one platform that does this, one does that. It's hard to make a scalable product. So I think we've suffered from a lack of innovation. Not all, but a lot of the MLSs, if you go on them, it's like 1998 in terms of the presentation. I won't even show a client the MLS, how it prints out, or I won't even email to them because I think it looks so dated. So I think the industry is really ripe for innovation, and we're really going to lean in and try to be part of that.
So when you look at an organization like NAR that is $1 billion, been around for over 100 years, 1.5 million members, is there a tipping point for you personally as you build this out and needing to meet potentially increased demand from agents looking for an advocate, looking for an association, looking for somebody who's innovating? Is there a point, you're a hands-on kind of guy, there's got to be a point where you kind of get to a critical mass. Like, do you formalize this? Do you set up a shop in DC? Do you start testifying on the Hill? Do you stop kind of doing your day job and focus on this? I mean, yes, you created something, and it seems like there's a lot of momentum going, Jason. And at some point, you probably got to you have a day
So
job and you have things going on, but
So
like,
we are interviewing for a political director, lobbyist, executive director. Probably at some point have a presence in DC.
yeah,
Again, we're starting small and we're building this for the long haul. So
yeah,
so I'm prepared to invest whatever time that I need. Same with Mauricio to get the infrastructure done. We're looking to get it done right, not get it rushed.
mhm,
So if I have to testify in Capitol Hill, I'll do that for now until we have
sure.
a staff built up. Um, but we're going to do it the right way, and we're never going to make membership required.
Yeah,
We always want to be in a position where we're proving our value, and we want people to be like, I want to be a member.
yeah,
I like what they're doing. I'm all about what they're doing. Like I want to earn it.
mhm,
I don't want to give in. I don't want to know we just have this recurring revenue stream,
sure.
and because 8 more agents are going to pop up, then we'll just get them. I want people to join because they want to be a member, because they like what we're doing.
That's great. Now talk to us about, you know, as we're winding down here, it's always good to have a kind of call to action, right? Like, what's your message, whether it's to, you know, fellow brokers and realtors out there, whether it's to builders, right? Like, I feel like we could have totally had a different conversation a year ago, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's a housing crisis in America, like there's not a lot of supply, we're having all these challenges, construction costs are up, right? Like, there's a lot happening in just residential real estate in general, yet we're talking about this kind of, you know, budding crisis. So what's the kind of call to action in general to maybe the development community and then the policymakers? I mean, have there been examples of policymakers that have kind of gotten out ahead of this in a way that you appreciate? And I know there's a lot there to unpack, but kind of call to action to the kind of, you know, broader community.
So I think right now is not the time for us to be playing on our heels as an industry. We need to go on offense. We need to be talking to, it's not elected officials' fault if they have bad information. It's our fault for not conveying it.
Fair
So
enough.
we need to be active in a way that I don't think we've been before. And, you know, our members, we're going to we tell them, like, this isn't democracy isn't a passive experience, and advocating for your interests and for the American consumer's interest is not passive. And we've got to actually do the work.
Yeah.
And so if you're interested in doing the work and being a part of it, like, we're losing everywhere. Like, I'm tired of us losing, and I want to change the narrative and to help people understand how important it is, the work that we do, and what we need from the public and from policymakers for not just for us to be successful, but for the American consumer to be best protected. Because my worry is that we're about to see disenfranchisement from the market, and it's a latent consequence. It wasn't intended. It's not the purpose, but I don't think policymakers fully understand what's about to come.
Yeah.
That's where we come in. We're the experts. And so let's help shape the narrative out there and try to make some changes. And I think we will be successful with that.
Well, Jason, it's so good to see you. It's incredible what you've been able to put together in such a short period of time.
Thank you.
And I think it's not only a testament to kind of who you are, but also kind of just like folks in general. Reading the newspaper, paying attention to something that doesn't seem like it's right, and actually stepping up, because everyone thinks that somebody else is going to actually step up and take on these challenges and push out and put together a petition. And that often case doesn't happen, right? So it takes kind of being a willingness to put yourself out there. So kudos to you on everything you've done. Excited to see where this all goes, and see you in DC soon.
Yes, I'll be there soon.
Yes, and our next conversation, a fellow historian, and we'll talk about your kind of affinity for history soon, but we're welcoming John Meacham next week on the 24th of April. He's coming after Jason Haber. He was
I'll be
big
the
on
warm-up act for John Meacham any day.
So appreciate you being here. Thanks everyone for tuning in. You can always visit coffeewithken.com, catch up on past sessions, sign up for future ones, and you can like and subscribe and follow us on YouTube and Spotify. Jason, until next time, man.
Thanks, Ken.
Good to see you.
You too.